Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you today. Dr. Suzanne Manser and I, Angela Bixby, are here for our next episode of Psyched conversations between a psychic and a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. We decided a few months ago that it could be beneficial to our audiences to talk about some of the similarities and differences that we find in each of our practices, given that our work is similar and also vastly different. Today, we are excited to talk to you guys about self-judgment, but hang in there with me. It's going to be a fun one. First off, I wanted to acknowledge just really how intense this time is on the planet. And the last thing that we want to do is to be adding things to your list. And we're hoping that we don't want to add to your to-do list. We're hoping that today serves to help lighten your loads a little bit. It's an invitation really to release a few things that might help you to feel a bit lighter. So we're going to talk about just a couple of ways that you can kind of release some of that self-judgment. But I'm really excited because I'm here with Dr. Manser, and she also volunteered to share a story about herself, a personal anecdote about self-acceptance. So, hi, Suzanne. I'm glad you're
Hey,
here,
Angela.
and
Thank you
please
very
share your
much.
story with us.
So, so this is a story that I've told before, and it's a fun one. So I'm glad we're starting with it. So I'm 54. About 4 years ago, when I was 50, my kids were I should be able to do this math faster, 6 and 8, and they were in a family taekwondo class. And so my husband and I would go every, twice a week and watch them do their thing. And at some point, for some reason, I said, if you guys stay in this class for another couple months, I will join your class because it was a family class. It was both adults and kids. And they were very excited, and I thought it was going to be pretty easy. And I was kind of excited, blah, blah. Anyway, first day of my taekwondo class, I'm in my white, I don't know actually what they're called, but my white
Gee.
taekwondo uniform, gi. And first of all, it was not nearly as easy as I was expecting. It was freaking hard for a 50-year-old body to do the things that little 6 and 8-year-olds do. But one of the things that we did, because we're in taekwondo, was kick. So we did a lot of kicking. We did some jumping jacks. We did those sorts of things. And what I hadn't known, because I hadn't done kicks and jumping jacks in many, many years, is that I had pelvic floor issues. And I started peeing my pants as soon as we started doing jumping jacks. And then I was kicking, and I had to kick towards my instructor. And every time I kicked, I would pee my pants a little bit. And it was so embarrassing, not only because I'm wearing all white and my white pants are getting wet, and there's the instructors, and I think maybe there was another adult or two in the class, but it was mostly kids. But there's also a wall of windows where all the parents watch the kids doing their class. And so I mean, the class was, I don't know, 45 minutes or something. And I mean, from the get-go, I was peeing my pants. And so all these people were watching, all the, people in the class. And I had a decision to make pretty early on of like, okay, well, I either kind of jet or I just keep going. And I decided I was gonna just stick with it and keep going. And so even though my pants were wet, I kept kicking and doing jumping jacks and staying in the class and doing the thing. And um, afterwards, my husband, who I saw taking pictures the entire time, told me that he had no idea. He couldn't see it from that far away, so hopefully not all of the parents were aware. But it was this moment for me of afterwards, I mean, for sure I was embarrassed. There was no way that I wasn't embarrassed. But I had had a little conversation with myself about the fact that it was important for me to show up. It was important for me to show up for my kids, for myself, to do this thing I said I was going to do, and to kind of be an adult about it and not run away and hide. And it was such a moment for me of doing things differently. I'm a person who I'm real good at self-judgment. I am really
Mm.
good at thinking that I'm doing something embarrassing or feeling like everybody else is really cool and I'm really not. So to be actually peeing my pants in a room full of people was a big challenge for me. But when I got past the judgment of it by focusing on the value of staying in the class, that made the whole experience different. I was able to start kind of taking it lightly. I was able to start laughing at myself during the class. And again, afterwards, when I went out and talked to my husband and he told me all the pictures that he took and he couldn't see the wet, I was relieved. But we were also able to, have this light kind of funny moment. And same with my kids when, when my kids and I were talking about it. Um, it was a really nice moment of like, yep, this was funny. It was kind of embarrassing, but guess what? I had a good time actually, and I tried a new thing and I went back the next week and I peed my pants a little bit more, but I eventually figured that out. Um, but the opportunity that I had to sit with a lot of self-judgment, to sit with embarrassment, and to make the decision that actually it was worth it for me to feel all of those things. And the value of staying in the class was so much bigger than the self-judgment by the end. It was a really it was a funny, embarrassing moment, but it was also a really important lesson for me to lean on the value of what's important because that's always going to trump self-judgment, at least for me. And that's what I'm hoping part of what we're going to be, imparting today to the folks who are watching.
Beautiful. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I know our audience does. Yeah, that's an intense story. And brava to you for focusing on the value of staying with the experience versus giving too much credence to all the feelings and the thoughts and the self-judgment that you could have been swimming in for a lot longer than you likely were.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I love how much you focus on the value of the experience as a way to navigate that situation. I guess I would ask, hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot, were there other things that you can identify that you sort of did internally to get yourself to that place that might be helpful for people to hear about?
Um, the first thing I did, I'm just sort of walking myself through because it was a while ago. The first thing I did was really kind of what I was getting at with myself. Um,
Sorry, we just had a glitch, Suzanne.
oh, okay.
Could you please repeat? Because basically I experienced you freezing and didn't hear anything, but you said the first thing and then it froze. Could you please repeat?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just saying that um, when I realized I was peeing my pants, I first sort of assessed the situation to kind of see if there was any way that I could avoid people knowing,
Hmm.
um, avoiding the embarrassing thing. And when I realized
Hmm.
there was no way to avoid any of that, I, had this kind of conversation with myself, as I said. Um, and it was about the value of being there, showing up for my kids and all of those things. But it was
Hmm.
also about I'm just remembering now that you asked. I looked at my instructor who is I don't know, maybe in his 50s as well,
Hmm.
and hardcore martial arts instructor. And when I looked at his eyes, he was a human. He wasn't like a
Hmm.
judgmental authority figure in that moment when
Hmm.
I was in my embarrassment. And I don't know whether he was acknowledging that my pants were wet or not, but I
Hmm.
was able to see this is just a person. And all those people out there who are watching me through the window, they're also just people. And there was um, a common humanity moment of,
Hmm.
yeah, we're all in this together. And it does not have to be this big thing that makes me such an embarrassment and makes me so different from everybody else in this room. And actually, I didn't go through this entire thought process there, but there's a lot of value in kind of stepping out of this spotlight that we put ourselves in and connecting with what's called common humanity, just this idea that nobody's perfect. We all do embarrassing things. We all make mistakes, and we all can give ourselves grace and give each other grace around that. And so there was actually this connection to that in that moment that allowed me to step outside of the embarrassment and just be in, yeah, I'm human. That's okay. I'm human and that's okay.
Beautiful. I love that. I love how you got to that self-acceptance. Thank you for explaining that to us. And I love that you gave yourself that grace and allowed yourself to simply be human because we've all, yeah, all had experience, excuse me, embarrassing things happen, embarrassing experiences. That's beautiful. Love that you were able to feel into that. Yay.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So, I'm curious, does this personal story that you shared with us, does this come up in your practice? Does it benefit your clients or your patients to hear about it too? Does it help them be a little lighter with themselves?
Yeah, I actually have shared this in a variety of formats. And um, I think what it does, number one, depending on where I'm sharing it, but it makes me human to whoever I'm talking
Hmm.
to, because if I'm in the therapist role, sometimes that can feel a little hierarchical.
Hmm.
And to just bring us onto the same level. Yep, we're
Hmm.
both human. We're all just human. I make mistakes. I do stupid stuff. That doesn't make me any less worthy. That doesn't make me any less worthy of acceptance, of self-acceptance, or otherwise. Um, so I do think that sharing it with people, A, it's funny and, it's nice to have a moment of humor, but it's also just, it makes everybody relatable to each other.
Yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
it's so important to recognize that we really are all on the same equal playing field.
Absolutely. I love that so much so. What I'm hearing as you tell us all of this is I'm hearing that you did a really good job of I'm going to take a leap here and say kind of de-identifying with your emotions in the moment of being embarrassed and choosing, right, another perspective, whether that was a series of thoughts and or emotions, right, by focusing on the value and all of the things that you've shared with us. And that's something that I try to remind people as much as I can in the work that I do is that I say to people, and I've been on a particular kick with it this week for whatever reason, you are not your thoughts and emotions. I tell people that all the time, and so, a lot of times people are sort of surprised. They're like, "What do you mean? Of course I am. Like they come from me, so they're me." And so I'm really working towards helping people get to more of that perspective that I gained a lot of knowledge on, self-knowledge on when I took Tibetan Buddhist vows in the early aughts, 2006, and was really into Buddhism when I was younger. So I've been sort of studying this for a long time, and I was like, it was always appealing to me, that aspect of Buddhism where they work a lot on detachment from things like feelings and emotions. So I've been trying to just help people, reminding them of that in different situations, personally and professionally a lot this week and lately. Because I find that when we remind people that they're not their thoughts or their emotions or those experiences, that it can be really helpful and liberating and empowering for them to go, oh, gosh, okay. I feel like it helps them then realize and recognize that they actually have choice in their thoughts and emotions. And that's a really hard thing to get to, right? You know this as a psychologist, and we know this as humans, women in our 50s, living life for this long. It's hard to get to that point of objectivity about our thoughts and our emotions. Dare I say that level of metacognition, right, is what I think neuroscience calls it, where we're aware that we're thinking about what we're thinking, we're gaining that objectivity and how we're relating to our thoughts and our emotions. And so it can be a long time before people can get there. So if someone's listening that doesn't feel like they can relate to that and still feels really driven by their thoughts and emotions and really identify to them, that's okay. The invitation here is to consider in some situations where you might be able to gain some distance from your thoughts and emotions, especially like Suzanne's wonderful example of being in front of a lot of people in an embarrassing situation in front of her family and kids and all of that, sort of mixed company with kids and adults and all of that. There's value in gaining some objectivity from those different emotional states and sometimes thought loops. It's in that value and that space of getting that distance and going, oh, I don't have to move like I own this or this drives who I am. I can actually turn in another direction and maybe make a joke about it and move on, right? Or maybe go focus on something else like you did, you focused on the value. So I really appreciate what your story of self-acceptance illustrates for everyone.
Angela, everything you're saying is so on point. The concept of you're not your thoughts, you are not your thoughts or your feelings. One, I heard this somewhere. Somebody who's watching this is going to know who said this because it was somebody pretty well known.
Drop it
Um,
below, you guys. We're tired here. Anyway, go ahead.
but somebody said, you're not your thoughts or your feelings. You're the one who notices your thoughts and your feelings. And for me, that was a really helpful way to put it. Because yeah, in that moment when I was in that class, if I could have just been embarrassed and then done what I always do when I'm embarrassed, which is duck out essentially. But because I noticed that I was embarrassed, like you said, I had the space to make a different choice, and I
Mhm.
could have focused on the embarrassment, or what I did what I did. I just chose to focus on the value of staying. But only because I had that distance, only because I realized I was not my embarrassment, was I able to actually make a choice. And that's where the power comes from.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, another aspect of this that Suzanne and I were chatting about a little bit before we were setting up what we were going to talk about, with you all and for you all today, both of us are really sensitive to kind of judgment, right? And we understand, I think we both work really hard within ourselves and within our lives, and certainly within our practices with our clients, for me, and patients for Suzanne, in helping people to come out of a lot of self-judgment. It's so really being able to notice that is I would say a first step for people, right? And again, you illustrated that really well with talking about choosing not to sort of be your embarrassment. You also chose not to judge yourself and sort of fall back into a past pattern that you mentioned. You could have just ducked out and then, not talked about it. And so you really demonstrated beautiful evolution and beautiful non-self-judgment in that moment of yourself.
I think there's something so powerful when you realize that you don't, I don't know if it's that you don't have to judge or that there's an option to not judge. I'm not sure exactly what there is there, but or how that works. But um, when you can kind of click into that idea of not judging yourself, and when you can practice not judging yourself, I used the word power before, but that for me, that's where empowerment comes from because
Mhm.
if you don't judge yourself, you don't need to accept anybody else judging you. It doesn't impact you the same if somebody else judges you. So on that day when I was peeing my pants and I was embarrassed, if some kid or adult had come up and like made some snarky remark, it I would have laughed the way I'm laughing. Like it wouldn't have embarrassed me anymore. I would have just been like, yep, I totally peed my pants. Because
Wow.
they don't have any leverage. If I've accepted myself, there's no leverage in critiquing or criticizing. And so that's for me where the power of being able to, if you can, I always think about it as a hierarchy. If you can sort of be in charge of how you respond to your thoughts and emotions, because you can't
Mhm.
control necessarily what shows up, but you can control how you respond to them. If you can be in charge, then you can um yeah, I guess I'm not saying anything different. You can choose different thoughts and emotions. You can choose how you want to respond based on where you want to get to, not based on the old patterns that show up. And so because, I've been working on myself forever, I knew in that moment in the dojo that I didn't want to be a person who runs away because I'm embarrassed. I wanted to be a person who can quote unquote handle it. And
Mhm.
so because I knew that about myself, because I had a goal that I wanted to get to, it was so much easier for me to see what was going on and then make the decision that I did.
Beautiful. I appreciate all that you illustrated with that. Absolutely. And when you were talking about surmising if a kid had walked up to you and laughed at you or something because of what had happened, that basically you would have laughed right along with them, not at yourself, but just because there was no longer any sting in that happening. It sounds like you're illustrating a version of taking your power back, right? Like you took any
Hmm.
power that someone else would have had out of that kind of exchange by just deciding that you weren't going to be embarrassed. And you sort of like, removed any judgment. Therefore, if someone else tried to judge you, it wasn't going to be very successful because you'd already removed judgment from the equation for yourself.
Yeah,
So
that
cool.
that is the power. I mean, I think we're so I mean, I could go down a whole thing. I think society absolutely trains us to judge ourselves for all kinds of reasons, and if we can get out of that habit and we can see the value in not judging ourselves, I think a lot of people think there's value in judging yourself. If we can get out of
Hmm.
that, all of that rhetoric,
Hmm.
um, yeah, it really gives us so much inner strength and solid
Hmm.
ground under our feet because then we're completely allied and aligned with ourselves. We don't
Hmm.
need to be allied or aligned with anybody else, with their judgment or what they might have to say about us. And that alignment with self, that's where our power comes from. And I'll stop talking in a second, but aligning with ourself, meaning the person at the top of the hierarchy, not with our thoughts or our feelings. And that
Hmm.
can be as we're talking about, that can be a really challenging distinction to make.
Absolutely. I before I did this work, I worked in sales, marketing, and healthcare, right? So what you're talking about with the hierarchy of remaining at the top, I often call that a case manager. I say to my
Mm,
clients, like, be your own case manager in the situation. Because in healthcare, case managers tend to be there's a role that they play where they often help delegate, handle a lot of decision making, right? For a lot of different services and things for a patient. So anyway, yeah, I use similar language to how you're describing it and working to help empower people. Yeah, I've said for a really long time that we create our lives by choice. And I say things like that and I get the concept. And I understand that breaking it down in these ways can be really helpful for people sometimes because it isn't always that simple. Some people don't even realize that their emotions and their thoughts are choices, right? A lot of people are very identified to their thoughts and their emotions. And I hear you. I mean, I'll get on the soapbox for a little bit about society and us being so judgmental of ourselves. I mean, I'll get on the soapbox from sort of my industry and what I talk about this time period that we're in, this great awakening period, and this, 10-year span where we're going through so many massive changes on the planet on all levels for all different reasons. But one of the biggest threads that I think is most important for people to remember when we're, living through chaos day to day in all the ways that we all are, regardless of how much you watch the news or not, we're all feeling it. Regardless of how much you know how sensitive you are, we're all feeling it. The beautiful thing is that we're learning more how connected we are and how alike we are, right? And that's part of this sort of power to the people that's happening now, right? But a lot of what's going on during this great awakening is us remembering our empowerment. In my world, it's yeah, we're all psychic, right? I teach people to connect to their psychic skills, but there's a lot more that comes along with it. And it's this deep personal sovereignty or freedom and independence is, the word sovereignty I sort of see as a combination of freedom and independence all at once that we feel inside and that we're meant to live from that versus things that have been sort of placed on us to mute our empowerment. Okay. And I don't mean to sound powerful or excuse me, paranoid, but from all of the controlling forces and systems, and the people that are sort of running the planet, right? Again, don't mean to sound paranoid or anything like that, but that's part of the reality of what we're living through. And it's why Suzanne and I are doing this project and really wanting to have these conversations to remind you guys from our perspectives and the work that we do, helping people to evolve at this time, this really hard time on the planet, that you're very powerful beings, all of you, regardless of where you are with your psychological challenges, whether you've done any work in therapy, whether you've seen a psychic or not, or whether you're somewhere in between or thinking about the value of either of these practices for you. We're happy to meet you where you are. Everyone's at a different place, but ultimately we're meant to all come out of this with this deep knowing of how powerful and strong we are. So I love all of what you said about this because you're really illustrating that well for our audience. Thank you.
I'm so glad. I think I mean, as you said, it really goes against the grain of society for us to not judge ourselves. I think we're taught that it's humble or something to judge
Mhm,
yourself. And if you don't judge yourself, you're never going to grow and you're going to get stagnant. And I've heard just sort of all these things.
mhm,
And I think people get judgment confused with, curiosity, or there's so many other
mhm,
things that can influence us to grow and evolve that don't
mhm,
involve telling ourselves that we suck unless we're
mhm,
some particular way.
mhm,
There's just nothing good that comes from that, in my opinion. But because it's so ingrained in us, because we see everybody else doing it, I
mhm.
think a lot of us don't even know that you don't have to judge yourself, that there's no,
Agreed.
again, in my estimation, no value in it.
Mhm,
Um, you can want to change things about yourself. You cannot like things about yourself without judging them.
mhm,
Judgment can play no role in any of that.
mhm,
So the idea that you can um, be a very self-aware person who makes changes, evolves, and grows without judgment, I think people have no idea how to do that. And that's what I'm hoping we're starting to give people a little glimpse into today with this
Beautiful.
conversation.
Yeah, I agree. That's beautiful. And thank you for helping me land that plane. I can get that way when I soapbox and you helped land it back with the self-judgment. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing is I think that judgment's also been used as a tool by the kind of, ruling classes or oppressive forces, right? That are kind of being dismantled at this time. And it's meant to bring us back to ourselves and not have to put our value in someone else's hands, whether they're, the mayor or the president or the patriarch in a family or the boss at a job, right? Of course, there are lots of situations where it's important to be aware of our behaviors and follow rules and things like that for, civil society to happen. But it's something that's right. We've all been sort of groomed or trained to judge ourselves. And I think it comes from the power over paradigms that we're working on eradicating that. So, yeah, thank you for that reminder around self-judgment. One of the things that I'll say that I often offer to clients is along the lines of not judging themselves and certainly assuring them that it's a judgment-free zone when they work with me and I'm not judging them for whatever they bring to their sessions and such. But I also say to them that if I ever, along these lines of being in a position of authority, if I ever say something that doesn't resonate with you, just leave it on a shelf. You don't have, you might want to pick it up later and pick it up and examine it. And you might not. You might not agree with some of the guidance that I bring through from spirit for you. So I really try to take that to the nth degree to empower my clients to remind them that they don't have to take in or believe or like what it is that I said, they can really just put it there. And if they don't even want it on their shelf, they could throw it in the trash can, right there in my office. I don't see clients in person anymore, but in theory or, on the way out the door, that it's not going to hurt me because what's coming through is for them and they really get to decide what they want to take in. So I hope that that also helps lead clients to less self-judgment. What are some of the ways that you help your patients to be in self-acceptance or less self-judgment, Suzanne?
Well, we were talking before about the shelves and bookshelves, and there's an analogy that I use that is a way of reminding people that they're not their thoughts and feelings. And
Mhm.
so when thoughts or feelings revolving around or involving self-judgment show up, um, there's this analogy that helps you get some distance from them. So if you are in a moment of situation, I'm peeing my pants, I feel really embarrassed. Um, I'm not, I'm not cool or something. I imagine a bookshelf in front of me. I invite people to imagine a bookshelf in front of you full of books. And when I'm in that moment of feeling really embarrassed, I see myself reaching for this book. And in this case, the book that I'm reaching for is, oh my gosh, I peed my pants. I'm so uncool. That's the title of the book. And so I see myself reaching for this book, and then I can say to myself, wait a minute, I've taken this book off the bookshelf before. I have read this book so many times. I know what it says at the beginning, I know what it says at the end, I know what it says everywhere in between. There's no reason for me to take that book off the shelf and read it because if I do, I know I'm going to feel bad about myself at the end, and that's not where I want to land. So I'm going to leave that book up there. If I see myself reaching for it, I'm just going to bring my hand right down. I'm either not going to reach for a book at all and walk away, or I'm going to look for a different book. Maybe there's a book that says Suzanne's super cool, or something like that. Um, it doesn't have to be that kind of a book, but the idea is, again, it's a reminder that if you can catch yourself thinking or feeling something
Mhm.
that's not helpful, you can actually stop yourself from continuing to think and feel that. And it's not necessarily so easy as just imagining yourself not reaching for a book. It's going to take practice a lot of the time.
Mhm.
But there is real strength and power in deciding, hey, this feeling, this thought that I'm having is not helpful to me. So I'm not going to hang out with it. I'm not going to sit with it any longer. I'm going to go focus on something else that is helpful for me. And often that, anything involving self-judgment, in my estimation, is not helpful. So if you can catch yourself in it and just, I mean, even if you turn toward, I'm going to turn on a TV show or I'm going to sing my favorite song in my head. It doesn't have to be that you're thinking I'm wonderful. It's just don't think that self-judgment thing anymore. You don't have to.
Mhm.
You have the power to not do that. Um, and so thinking about the bookshelf and not reaching for the book is just a little reminder that you have the power to not continue with this unhelpful thought or feeling that you're having.
I love it. Gosh, thank you for sharing that. So helpful for so many people. And it's, as we talk about it, I'm even noticing why this is such hard work for people. There are kind of a lot of steps involved and a lot of awareness at a lot of different points. And so the last thing we want, as we said at the beginning, is for you guys to feel overwhelmed or like you have something more to add to your to-do list at this busy time. So we invite you to really just notice your thoughts and think about where you can release some judgment of self and also accept yourself in the ways that make sense to you. Do you have any final tips for our audience, Suzanne, before we close?
Well, in the spirit of simplicity, I always say that self-acceptance really has two steps, and you just named them, but I'm going to reiterate them because it's one of those simple but not easy things. The first step is to notice something about yourself. The second step is to not judge it. So, I might notice that I am not great at directions. So I would say, I'm not great at directions. That's self-acceptance because I didn't say, I'm not great at directions and that sucks, or I'm not great at directions and man, I don't want to tell anybody because that's embarrassing. I just said, yeah, this thing exists and it doesn't need to be judged. And that's really all self-acceptance is noticing what exists without judging it, which is again very simple, but not easy because we're so good at judging.
Beautiful. So well said, Dr. Manser. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela.
You are welcome. It has been a joy to be here with you again today. And thanks again to our audience. And we'd like to remind you guys, not only can you tell us who said the quote that Suzanne said earlier, drop it in the comments below, but if there are topics of conversation or subjects that you would like to hear us break down and talk about in the ways that we do here on Psyched, feel free to send us a message, drop comments below. Of course, we appreciate it if you're able to give the video a like or a share on either of our channels. For now, we'll say have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you guys soon on our next episode of Psyched. Thank you. See you later.